In court today, dressed in a jail jumpsuit, the man accused in the brutal murder of his own mom inside their $1.9 million home in a ritzy Connecticut town. Sebastian Van Stockum may spend the rest of his life in a much different setting than the picturesque landscapes of New Canaan, Connecticut, allegedly because he did the unthinkable to someone who always supported him. Not only are the details hard to comprehend in this story, I'll tell you what he told 911 dispatchers, and I'll also show you a bizarre online profile that this accused killer allegedly made and what it tells us about what may be going on in his mind and his life. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. A 20-year-old Connecticut man cried "Mama" as police found him at his home when they responded after he called them saying he had killed his mom with a hammer. Now, this is the man who police say called them saying that he allegedly killed his own mother. His name is Sebastian Van Stockum, and he's 20 years old, and he lived with his mom in a nearly $2 million home in New Canaan, Connecticut. Now, New Canaan, that is a nice part of the state of Connecticut, a lot of wealthy residents, and not a lot of crime. So as you can imagine, this story is shaking a lot of people in that community. Now, before I get into the details of what Van Stockum allegedly told dispatchers and police on the night he is accused of killing his own mother and what he did in court today, I want to break down for you what we have learned about him and his alleged victim, his own mom. Now, Sebastian Van Stockum lived with his mom, Laura Williams. She was 55 years old. She grew up in Virginia, but she settled in Connecticut. Her brother told Hearst Connecticut Media that she sold high-class antiques from her home, and her brother also said that she was someone who he would describe as driven. Her brother also says that she dated a famous restaurateur named Dirk Van Stockum, and that is Sebastian's dad, but they never married. It doesn't appear that Sebastian Van Stockum or his mom, Laura Williams, really have any sort of previous criminal record, and it's what makes stories like this so difficult to comprehend. This is Laura Williams' profile that we found on truthfinder.com. We partner with Truthfinder here at Law&Crime. It's a powerful public records search service that we use to do research. It's a useful resource because you put in a name, you can get address information, criminal history, and much more. And it can also give you some peace of mind. Truthfinder is one of the largest public records search services in the US, and with a paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone in your area, and that can include looking up registered sex offenders in your area as well. So stay informed, stay safe, search public records with Truthfinder at truthfinder.com/OTC. Now, as for their son, the suspect in this story, Sebastian Van Stockum, we're still working to learn more information about him. He didn't seem to have a huge social media presence except for one website that gave us a glimpse, just a little bit, into his mind potentially. Take a look at this. We found an online profile for Sebastian. This is on a website called Roomies. Think of it like Tinder or Bumble for people who are just looking for a roommate. And this is Van Stockum's alleged profile where he lists his work as a busser. Now, it also has an area where someone can write just a little bit about themselves, but this is what Sebastian allegedly wrote. It says, quote, "Hi, this is Seb, and I don't know else would go to school with 4 other Sebastians or meet people who have their kids named after me. I'm popular with common boy names. If a parent wants to name their kid Sebastian, who can say no to them?" He goes on to say that he's an average guy with a tall stature who's reconsidering college. He then says, quote, "I'm a gamer. Although not as big of a one as I try to tell people, it can be a tiny bit hard to put the controller down and take a break when you are deep into a game. We've all been there, just gotta take better care of the habit with time checks." He goes on to say that he likes graphic novels. He also says that, quote, "I did check off cannabis friendly, but with a lot of deliberation of taking it easy and slowly down on the smoking. If little me was told to cut it out, he would take it kindly, but now I'm aware that it's gotten my hands tied in old financial debt from how much no sane person would spend on like gaming, that needs to be monitored. He signs off, and this is important because I'll talk a little bit more about this with an expert in just a moment, who says this was a profound part of this in trying to understand potentially who Sebastian Van Stockum is. He signs off by saying, quote, "I didn't go over all the basics, didn't want it to drag on for pages and then chapters to be made into longer paragraphs, but into a single book that I know will sell 0 copies, but I'm done keeping you here. You may leave," end quote. Now again, this is a description for someone who is looking to share a living space as a roommate. And he gives this very, very long description that kind of just goes on to some of the issues that he's having in his life. Now, Sebastian's uncle told the Stanford Advocate that Williams and her son, they did argue about what Sebastian should be doing with his life. But he also says that Laura Williams, the victim in this story, the mother of Sebastian Van Stockum, that she did everything to support her son in whatever he was doing in life. Now, with so much support, it makes what happens next really hard to comprehend, but that is the crux of what we're talking about today. According to police records obtained by Law&Crime, police were called to a home in New Canaan on October 24th. It was late at night before midnight, and police say a passerby had reported hearing a voice calling out, "Mama." Now, when police arrived, they found Williams dead in the driveway. Police say they observed, quote, "blunt force trauma to the left side of her head, a cracked skull, and a pool of blood adjacent to the head. There was a hammer covered in blood near her head." Police say they approached the house and they saw Sebastian inside on the phone sitting on the floor. And when police opened the door, they noticed the phone was on the line with 911. Sebastian was cuffed and he was taken to a police cruiser. Now, one officer writes, when he told another officer to search the house, Sebastian says, quote, "She's dead." Police say when they asked Sebastian if he was involved in the incident, he responded, quote, "What does it look like?" He then said, quote, "I did it." It's important to note that these statements were made after he was read his Miranda rights, according to police. Now, Sebastian then goes on to allegedly say, quote, "I took my mom's life," and then said, quote, "I tried using a knife, I tried using a hammer, and I used my fists." He then went on to say, quote, "She's not going to wake up. She's not." Police say when Van Stockum got in the back of a police cruiser, he got emotional and he broke down, allegedly saying, "I was a problem ever since I was born. I don't have time to take any pressure off me. I want all the pressure. I want to be crushed." He also told paramedics checking him out that, quote, "I deserve to suffer." Police found Laura Williams in the driveway, but they also found what they called a crime scene inside the house.
Good morning, Your Honor. Mr. Van Stockum has submitted an application for public defender services.
Today, this is Sebastian Van Stockum appearing in court in Connecticut. It was a very brief appearance, roughly 5 minutes in total. The suspect showed little emotion. He really just looked down the entire time as his attorney spoke with the judge. You can see him there, tall in stature in that orange jail jumpsuit. The attorney said that Van Stockum qualifies for a public defender, and Van Stockum's next hearing will be a probable cause hearing on January 2nd. New Canaan, again, it's the kind of place that typically does not see stories and crimes like this. And a former classmate of Van Stockum told TMZ that Sebastian Van Stockum once actually took a forensics class in high school that included blood spatter analysis and breaking down mock crime scenes as if they were investigating a murder. Now, that classmate also told TMZ that Van Stockum was known to be socially awkward. Van Stockum was initially held on a $2 million bond. He remains in jail in Connecticut ahead of that January 2nd hearing. Join us now to talk more about this and where this case could go from here is licensed clinical social worker and trauma expert Sherry Botwin. Thank you for being with us on Law&Crime. I know this is just such a sad case, traumatic case in so many ways. Going through this police report, I mean, the suspect, Sebastian Van Stockum, seems to make just a lot of statements. I mean, clearly admitting that he did this, walking officers through what happened. As an expert in this space, just what do you see when you read a police report and everything that he said?
When I see what he's saying and the way he's admitting to his guilt, there's definitely a level of consciousness, but I'm also sensing that he's in complete shock, almost like he just woke up from a bad nightmare. So when I read the statements that he's making, I'm thinking to myself, was he actually fully present and awake? Or was it one of those things where after the crime had been committed, does he then realize what he had just done?
What happens now where clearly you have these statements? How do you figure out whether or not in that moment he had an episode or if it was something that, clearly he knew what he was doing when he did it?
This is where we would definitely need him to get a full psychological and psychiatric evaluation. There are so many questions that I have as I'm reading the story about what was going on inside of this guy's mind. What's his backstory? What was his relationship like with his mom? Is there any type of background in the family? Do other people in the family or have other people in the family been diagnosed with things like schizophrenia, different types of mental health disorders that left untreated could lead to such horrific consequences?
Because on one side, he makes these statements where he talks about using a hammer. It's difficult to, kind of think about that. And, he says, I did it, she's dead. He makes these types of statements. But then it also stood out to me, he said something like, I've been a failure since the beginning. The pressure is breaking me. When it comes to someone and whether they can make an argument that it was a mental health issue, that was the reason that this happened, as opposed to any other reason, how does kind of making those statements about his past and maybe disappointment in his life, how could that impact what his defense could be?
So the thing to keep in mind is if he's going to plead insane, he would have to show the court that he had no wherewithal, no understanding of what he was thinking, what he was doing, the fact that he clearly has mental health issues. And again, I've never met him, but when he talks about that sense of failure, he is such, sounds like he's someone that has such low self-worth and self-esteem. It's clearly possible this is someone who has a plethora of mental health issues. Was he insane when he committed the crime? It's hard to say, because one of the questions that I have is when he starts to go after his mom and he sees that he's harming her, does he not see whether she's screaming out in pain or there's blood flying all over the room? Does he not actually see that? Or is there something going on in his brain that says to him, you should keep doing what you're doing, and then he wakes up out of like what feels like a nightmare and realizes what he's done? So there's so many different types of mental health issues that someone can have that can lead to this type of behavior. What we need to find out is what are his actual mental health disorders? What is his diagnosis? Does he have any type of history of violence? Clearly, from what we're reading, there's no history, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a history. This feels like a case of someone who got lost in the crowd, someone who may have been displaying warning signs that there's some severe mental health disorder, but because we don't have any record of that, no one has ever intervened. The only way we're going to find this stuff out is when he goes under some really thorough testing by a really skilled psychiatrist who can look for different traits that would help us understand, was he actually insane or is he just a really unwell guy with some other mental health issues?
When it comes to like an insanity defense, and let's just say that he is diagnosed with some sort of disorder where there's been examples of violence, and we don't know that, but is that enough for the insanity defense, or does it have to be specific evidence in that moment that he was insane, as opposed to he struggled with these issues for years and maybe there's some anecdotes along the way? I mean, what is, actually being able, in what will be a murder case, if this murder trial, if it gets that far, what would actually need to be proven to get him that defense?
From what I understand, he would have to be proven that while he was committing this act, this horrible act, that he was truly insane. That's going to be difficult, and that's something that I would imagine his defense team is going to want to pursue. But even if he had delusions, hallucinations, even if he's diagnosed with something where there's psychosis involved in the diagnosis, in order for him to be able to plead guilty by or innocent by due to insanity, they would have to show that during the actual crime that he committed against his mother, that he was insane in those specific moments.
I'm sure the prosecution and the defense, I feel like in a lot of trials you'll see, I mean, clearly the prosecution is going to bring in an expert that will support their theories, and then the defense will find someone that will support their theories. When it comes to diagnosing someone and looking at these statements and looking through and seeing whether he actually has a credible mental health issue that could be used in court, who's the person that decides what that is?
It's going to be a really skilled psychiatrist, but again, keep in mind, it's not just the psychiatrist, it's the testing that will be done. That's what's going to help us find the answer. So when you're working with maybe a forensic psychiatrist or someone who's really skilled at working with people with severe mental health issues like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, they will know what questions to ask, what testings to give to him in order to really determine, is this a case of insanity or is this a case of someone who's unwell? So it's going to be very important that they find the prosecutors, the defense team, they're going to really need to be mindful about who's doing the evaluating. It's never just one person that gives the opinion. It's the information we get from the defendant along with the skill of a psychiatrist that helps us to come to a conclusion.
Is even someone being unwell, let's just say he did know what he was doing in that moment, but clearly to do something like this, something is wrong. And there's some sort of challenge he dealt with in his life, to sadly, allegedly take the life of his own mom. But how could him being unwell and having those issues still play into his defense? How have you seen, in terms of whether it's bringing in an expert who can talk about these challenges, how that could potentially be something, if he was to face a jury and they're making a decision, that it could at least be something on his side? I think because clearly the state is going to just have so much evidence in this case against him that he did it.
I mean, it's a case where if he's not found insane, he's going to get charged with murder. Where it comes into play is when we're in the sentencing phase and the judge or the jury, depending on the state, has to decide the level of punishment, the mitigating factors, the things that the judge will mandate for him if he is sent to prison. The jury will have, I would imagine, some empathy or sympathy for him if they find out that, yes, he truly does meet criteria for major depression or antisocial personality disorder, these different things. But if they can't find him insane, he's going to be sentenced to prison. It's just a matter of how well the judge understands the mental health issues, if that's what we find out as part of this, or in the case of a jury, if they have a say in the level of sentencing. These are all factors that I think will determine how long or how long someone will be sentenced to prison, how severe the sentencing will be. But Chris, this is one of those situations where it's almost like it's too late. He committed the crime. His mom is gone. We're going to also need to hear from some of the other family members. I would imagine that will be part of the case to find out more about Sebastian's backstory and what else comes into play before the crime was committed.
And I know he has no prior criminal record. He's only 20 years old, recently graduated high school. New Canaan, Connecticut's a very nice town, not a lot of crime. So this is a very shocking place for all of this to happen. How common is it that someone who maybe is struggling with some sort of undiagnosed issue, and we don't know a lot about his mental health history at this point, but again, no criminal record to our knowledge, nothing has come out that there was any sort of issues in the past other than him just being socially awkward in high school, which could describe a lot of kids who are in high school. I mean, how common is it that someone can go from never being in contact with law enforcement, and then suddenly you're in a situation like this where he is accused of just such a horrific crime against the person he lived with, which was his own mom?
I mean, again, this is when I think about some of the stories around gun violence, teenagers going into schools and shooting kids, teenagers committing crimes against their own parents. I don't know the statistics. I can't say to you this is how often it occurs, but I can tell you this. When we have a teenager or young adult who's suffering with any type of mental health issue and there's any form of suicidal or homicidal urges and nobody knows, this is the risk that we take. This is the outcome. And these are the types of stories that I hope, wake up communities and really remind people that mental health issues are not something that we can see. Just because somebody hasn't gotten in trouble with the law or has no history of therapy or suicide attempts or committing crimes doesn't mean that every single person that's living on that street in that neighborhood is well. So this is where awareness, education about mental health, and the idea that if we ignore mental health issues and we sort of minimize the fallout that comes from them not being treated, these are the stories that we're going to be continuing to talk about.
Yeah, and I know that there's been a few that we've done on this show, and I think of the people who, like in this case, Laura Williams. I know her brother had said that she supported her son and everything he did, but they would get in arguments about what he was doing with his life and et cetera, and just the danger of living at home with someone who might have an undiagnosed mental health issue. Maybe we don't know, and unfortunately we'll never know just how much, I guess, knowledge she had about the issues that her son was dealing with. There is this, and I know I passed this over to you, this Roomies website, which is like Tinder for roommates. If you're looking for a roommate, and then he has this profile here, and just the description was a lot to take in, and I think you can see, and this is my unprofessional opinion, of just someone struggling here, and it's maybe social awkwardness. He talked about using cannabis. And that was really the only, kind of this self-medicating with cannabis, big into video games. Just what do you take away from, if you're looking for a roommate and then that's the description? I mean, it's certainly something that stands out to you.
So what stood out to me, and again, I read this after I heard about the crime, the last paragraph, when he talks about how he could have gone on for pages and pages, and then he says to his audience, you can stop reading now. I
Right.
almost felt like I was picking up on some type of emptiness, some type of loneliness and insecurity. It definitely stood out to me. I found him to be very sort of rambly in the paragraphs prior to that last paragraph, and I'm thinking if I were, saying to my son, you want to find a roommate? And he said, what do you think about this guy, Mom? I would say, this guy sounds like someone who doesn't seem well. And again, I read it after I heard about the
Sure.
crime, but these are the things when, we're not educated about mental health. I do this for my job, right? And there's still things that I may not see, but what I could feel when I read his description about himself is he feels to me like someone who has absolutely no sense of self and no worth. The way he sort of tells his audience, you can close the profile or you can move on to the next page. It's almost like you're not just a page in a website, you're an actual person.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point because, to your previous point about, unfortunately we've seen like mass shooters in schools, and it's a very different situation when we talk about the crime. But there is this kind of, I feel like often we come back to young men in their 20s and some of the challenges that just every generation has their own challenges, but that seems to come up a lot. Do you see those, I guess, lines, parallels in this case, maybe just with obviously a violence out of what seems like nowhere, man in his 20s, and then just this emptiness it seems that he has, where it was almost like this roommate website was, I don't know if it was a cry for help, but it seemed like it was something where this is everything you need to know about me. Oh, okay, just move on.
Yeah, it felt like sort of like an inadvertent cry for help, and it also felt like one of those cry for helps that are very subtle. So most people are not going to read it and go, "Ooh, is he actually okay?" People are going to read it and go, "Oh, I don't think I would want to live with someone like that," but not necessarily pick up on the signs. What I would say to you is I work with people who have children who are around the age of, starting around the age of 7, 8, and 9. And some of these signs that we're reading about with Sebastian, I know people who have kids who are maybe 10, 11, starting to display anger outbursts, lack of sense of self, all these different traits. So that's one of the things when they're doing the eval of Sebastian. I hope that they really look into that. Like, he may not have ever gotten in trouble. He may not have been diagnosed with anything, but looking back, were there warning signs? I think if they talk to other people in his family that knew him, I'm hoping that we find something out, because again, this is one of those stories where the story already happened. For him, in some ways, it feels like it's too late, but it's not too late for the next person who's sitting in their house who's thinking of doing something like what we just saw with Sebastian. Maybe we could stop this for somebody else moving forward.
No, that's a really good point, because it's too often that we find ourselves talking about these types of stories and warning signs and all of that. And again, it might be too late for him, but hopefully something from this story can help give warning signs to family members, communities, as these cases do seem to continue on. Sherry Botwin, it has been so great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for breaking down this story with us. Licensed clinical social worker and trauma expert. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.